International Women's Day session for the Americas here, and I am so excited to be here with all of you. My name is Beth Bovis, and I'm a partner at Kearney, and I want to introduce our panel and our session here today. This is the Purpose and Action session, and we're talking to 4 fabulous leaders who are making an impact every day in their work on the world around us. And so I'm very excited to hear their stories. First, thank you not only to our panelists, but to our sponsors for the program, which have been Stanley Black & Decker, UPS, and the UN Women's Generational Equality Foundation. So joining us today, we have 4 women who are leading the charge in their various areas. And we're going to get a chance here to get to know them, hear their stories, and get some questions answered from all of you in the audience today. So I'm just going to start by inviting each of them to introduce themselves with a little bit of a preamble from me. So Sana, I'm going to start with you. You're the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Amon, and having quite a week as you just launched one of your major initiatives this week, and I was so excited to be at the ribbon cutting. But your journey to get to Amman and to Chicago has been one that's involved many geographies and many different stops along the way. Maybe you could introduce yourself and share us a little bit about your story and how you got to Amman and to leading these fabulous initiatives.
Thank you, Beth. Such a pleasure to be here today. So really, when I think about it, I was trained as an architect. That was by profession is what I am. I'm an architect, and I soon after I graduated, I had like sort of 6 projects under my belt. I had an early start, and at some point during that, I lost my mother to a very short and decisive battle to cancer, and really struggled with finding my ground again and sort of finding my purpose in life for a little bit. So I really started to think about at that time that, okay, life there, struggle. That was really the first time I really experienced an insurmountable sort of obstacle or a major struggle personally. And I realized that struggle is a part of life and it's going to be there. And if struggle is inevitable, then I want to make sure that I'm struggling for something really, really good. And that was really what, caused me to be very impatient with architecture. I was like, never mind, I'm going to just move on and do something else. And I went on and studied social entrepreneurship in Sweden, went on, in Egypt when 2010, 2011, when Hosni Mubarak was stepping down. I was there again. It's insurmountable odds. No one was being allowed into the country, but I was one of 3 people that entered Cairo that day from the airport. And just since then, have found myself amidst many different communities. Really, so my story is one of, I guess, drive, a lot of persuasion and negotiation, because I couldn't have ended up in many of the places that I ended up in if I wasn't, really sort of pulling that or using that muscle. And there's a whole lot of love and beauty that I experienced, and a lot of inspiration that I got from strangers, people that that I'm told I have no relationship with, or I may not have any connection with, but yet I find them so close to my heart.
Thank you. What an inspiring story and welcome. Maria, if I can turn to you, you've just taken over as CEO and president at Red F. And but after quite a long career fighting for economic inclusion and development and fighting against poverty, maybe you could share a bit about how you came to find those as your passion and find your way to Red F.
Good morning. My name is Marie Kim. Super happy to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction. I mean, my pathway, you would like to think it was a relatively straight line. It was pretty fabulously circuitous, I'd say. I'm a comparative literature and French undergrad that ended up working in the insurance industry for 15 years and then flipped to a poverty alleviation organization, which now morphed into my current role. What? And the pivot point, somewhat similar to Sana, is 9/11. So when I was working at the insurance company, 9/11 happened. I was in my Cutlass Sierra driving to work when the second tower was hit. And by the time I got to work, everybody was crowded around the television, a really fat, bubbly television back in the day, not a nice lean one like we have today. And I just watched and watched and watched and realized if our days on this earth are this precious, You know, if we're this vulnerable, kind of, am I walking in my vocation? And I spent like a long sobering 3 years kind of contemplating that very notion, realized I wasn't, and then saved enough money to flip to the purpose sector, where I spent the next 15 years at an organization called CARA, based out of Chicago, which happens to be a big fan of Iman. So thank you for the good work that you're doing in Inglewood. But CARA is an organization that helps people experiencing homelessness and poverty get back to work. And it does that not just through a mission, but also through multiple businesses that become basically a training ground for individuals as they re-enter the workforce. And then that notion of social enterprise really turned me on. And Red F is an organization that's doing that at a national scale, investing in businesses like that at a national scale to kind of reveal and reinforce talent of people experiencing deep barriers to employment. And so my big pivot was 9/11, but my big why is, you know, all of us are, we have all of these strengths inside of us. And for many of us, that strength is not seen. And so for all of us where our talents are more readily seen, it's our duty and our privilege to be able to unlock that for the rest of the world. So that's what turns me on today. And I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Jill, if I can turn to you, you took the charge after law school to work in a few spaces before you decided to found your own organization to go after your passion. And maybe you could share a bit about, you know, what inspired you to found Public Rights Project and the journey you were on to get there.
Thanks so much, Beth, and excited to be here this morning. So I just want to celebrate circuitous paths like Maria, so thank you very much. My career before I was a lawyer, I actually was a classical ballet dancer for a while, and 9/11 was also what led me to go back to school and eventually go to law school. So I just want to give a further sort of amplification to that idea of taking the moments that come to you in life and rethink when it's necessary. So after I went to law school, I spent most of my background in civil rights law and state and local government. And a big turning point for me was the realization that so much of what I had learned about civil rights law and the civil rights movement was focused on only one piece of the puzzle that we often think is the whole puzzle. So when we think about the civil rights movement and we think about public policy, we typically think about legislation. You know, everyone who's seen Schoolhouse Rock has seen, you know, the story of how a bill becomes a law, and then the story ends when the law is passed. And we think, great, we won this battle, now people will have equal rights. And what I found working in state and local government was that so many of the laws we had fought so hard to pass were not actually getting to a real experience on the ground for people who needed the protection of those laws because they weren't being enforced. And so when I was in the state attorney general's office, I was actually charged with starting a new children's civil rights unit. The attorney general at the time, Kamala Harris, was really concerned with issues like the school to prison pipeline and the racial and gender disparities in young children, particularly those coming from low income families. And what we saw was that there was a huge gap between what the law says these children were supposed to get in terms of equal access to an education, protected environments if they have to be removed from their homes to go into foster care, equal treatment if they end up in the juvenile justice system to help them move their lives into a better path. And children just weren't getting that. And so we didn't need to pass a single new law. What we needed to do was actually build a dedicated unit within government of attorneys who were trained in these areas of law and actually resourced and equipped with the skills and information that they needed to actually bring cases to enforce children's civil rights. And so I started the Public Rights Project a few years later to help build a model across the country for state and local governments to make sure that when we pass a law like a new minimum wage or a paid sick leave law for workers, that we actually have the capacity in place to make sure that workers get what they're owed, and that when we pass a law, we mean it, and we make sure that it translates into reality for people. And so that was my turning point moment in government.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jill. And Erin, let me turn to you. And you're putting together a company as CEO of Social Solutions, but I know CEO of Goodco, as we might refer to it, pulling together many organizations whose sole purpose is to help amplify and support nonprofits and political organizations. But tell us how you got there, because you didn't start right in that space.
No, I started actually as a consultant at Carney early on in my career. So my path wasn't circuitous, but it was entirely accidental. And what happened was, through my career, I eventually got to be the chief marketing officer of Dell. And part of my remit as the CMO was our corporate social responsibility strategy. And that was our commitment to, sustainability practices, philanthropic giving, human rights, community and global enrichment. And just having that be a part of what my job was absolutely exhilarating, because it was the first time I recognized that companies and corporations actually do have and need to have a commitment to doing good in the world, that it's incredibly powerful for their employees, for their brands, for all the stakeholders that are involved. And just getting a glimpse into the opportunities that corporations had to drive massive change was really inspiring to me. And after that, I just kind of kept finding opportunities to find impact related jobs. I went and I became the CMO of a global renewable energy company. And then I just became the CEO here at Social Solutions a couple of years ago. And I'm at my point now in my career, like, I can't imagine not having a role that's focused on impact, because it is the most amazing thing as a leader to be able to inspire people that want to do great things in the world and make a huge dent. And so I feel like I have just the biggest privilege in the world to be able to do what I do.
That's wonderful. And it's inspiring. All of those journeys and how you got there are so different, but yet have this common thread of how I can just see your faces light up, and knowing most of you just see that passion and power, and how that comes to life in your day to day. So I know a lot of the people on this panel were inspired by those stories, and probably thinking about how they can make their journey to to where you are. One of the things I wanted to touch on, because it came up in a couple of the introductional comments, and maybe Jill and Maria, I'll ask you to comment on this. We know that in the impact space, nobody goes it alone, right? Part of how we make an impact is around partnerships and bringing organizations together, corporate, nonprofit, government, and different entities, and in order to deliver on the mission. And maybe I could ask each of you in your different spaces to talk about what works well in terms of creating that ecosystem, and maybe also what you'd like to see more of in terms of how stakeholders could engage.
I'll go ahead and kick us off. In terms of what works well, so if you think about Red F, we work with lots of different partners, both on this kind of systemic side of things, like what Jill was sharing, government partners, things like that, the actual practitioners that are doing the work, and a whole host of partners that help to amplify the mission. And for me, kind of what works well is if there's deep values alignment. How we look at the world is aligned and connected to each other. We see ourselves as inextricably connected to each other. And the second big piece for me for what works well is a focus on the outcomes, like what is the impact that we seek to create, not a marriage to our pretty packaged solution. So sometimes what happens is we all hunker down on, this is the thing, it's my model, I know it works, da 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 da. And sometimes we get so tied to that kind of very specific prescription that we don't zoom out and see the realm of the possible as it relates to navigating towards that ultimate outcome. And what I'd like to see more of, particularly in these last 2 years, we're emerging out of multiple pandemics as a country, as a world. I want to see more teeth. I want to see more practice beyond the policy, as Jill was alluding to, more traction beyond the black box on my Instagram feed, for example. I want to see more teeth. And so the more that we can compel both practitioners, policymakers, and especially employers around the country to kind of change their behaviors as a result of their shifted perspectives, the better off we will be as a country.
I just want to co-sign everything Maria said. So a couple things I would add in terms of partnerships. So Public Rights Project works with city, county, and state governments across the country. We work with philanthropy. We work with the private sector. We work with community-based organizations and advocates on the ground. And I think the most important thing that I've found in any kind of partnership or collaboration is understanding the different perspectives and incentives of each stakeholder, because people come to a potential partnership with their own set of perspectives, their own set of incentives and motivations. And I think sometimes we treat the impact space as everyone wants to have impact, and therefore we should all be always on the same page about the way to get there. And if we ignore the realities of that different stakeholders are facing in their jobs and their lives, et cetera, we're going to miss a lot of opportunities to figure out how to get aligned. And so one example that I've found in my when I used to be in government that I crashed and burned on, to be totally honest, was I wasn't really aware of the different incentives of folks within different corners of the Department of Justice, for example. I came in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like, this is public service, I'm excited. And everybody, people who had deep career expertise in sections of the department were like, who the hell are you first? And what's the reason why I should work with you? This isn't part of my job description. This isn't what I've been told that I'm supposed to do on the day-to-day basis. And so I had to really take a step back and think, okay, if I want to actually work with a new section of the department that isn't used to doing the kind of work that I'm asking them to do, then have I actually worked well with their supervisor, their section? Have I made sure that they actually have time to do the work that I am asking them to do, that they have been equipped with any training that they might need to do that work? All of those kinds of things can really, stop a partnership in its tracks before it starts. When we work with nonprofit groups now, one question that people don't always want to ask is, do you actually have grant funding to do the partnership that we want to do together? And organizations can really want to work together, but if they're really hobbled by restricted funding, then you may need to spend some time actually thinking about how to fund that work in order to get it started. And so those are just a couple of examples, but I think really being clear about what are the perspectives and incentives that people have that they're coming to the table with and how they might differ from yours, rather than just assuming that because everyone is in the social impact space, they're going to be aligned off the bat.
That's fabulous. Thank you. One of the things that you both, brought up is that the impact or what you're trying to accomplish is an important part of this. And Sana, I thought I might first ask you to talk a bit about how you measure impact when you're talking about, so many things you're trying to influence in an ecosystem. And then Erin, I'll turn it to you, because some of what your company does is help organizations to capture and measure and train impact, and you can get a perspective from there. But Sana, let me start with you.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, as change makers, we have our means, as has been said, and we also have our ends. So we have our North Star, and we have to take many steps and do many things on the way there. So for example, with Go Green on Racine, which is an equitable development neighborhood initiative, the North Star is to bridge the health and wealth gap in Inglewood. Chicago has a 30-year life expectancy gap, the largest actually in the country, between Inglewood and Streeterville, which is only 9 miles north. So when we evaluate, when I think about evaluating the impact of a project like the Fresh Market, which is the grocery store that Beth was mentioning and is the first Go Green project to have been launched, I would do that not only by evaluating the market for its success as a food retail operation, so in terms of its sales of healthy foods, its operational stability, its customer experience, value for money, the rewards program, and also just how customer participation in health and wellness programming is going, etc. But also on whether it is improving awareness on nutrition. Is it creating a social fabric? Is it driving health outcomes in the community? Is it boosting the profiles of the local vendors that are, at the market, that are being sort of displayed at the market? I would want to evaluate if it's improving the foot traffic in the intersection, if it's improving public safety, if it's affecting businesses in the area. Are existing businesses stepping up their game? Are new businesses being planned? I would want to know if it's affecting real estate prices, because we know within a quarter mile of a grocery store, real estate prices do go up. Is it localizing spending? We have a $55 million leakage in Inglewood on food spending that is sort of leaving the neighborhood because there aren't options to spend that money inside the neighborhood. So I would want to know how it's affecting neighborhood pride. Are residents feeling more happy about where they live? Is it inspiring resident leadership? Is it kind of increasing civic engagement? So to be clear, so we evaluate not only based on the integrity and the success of the means that we are deploying to achieve ends, but also on whether those means are actually in practice centering the people that they are meant to serve, and are those means bringing us closer to our North Star. And personally, as a I would also want to see, are we, in doing this work, are we sort of breaking down some of the barriers, right? Like, so when you think about the story of an immigrant and you think about the story of a person at the border, at the Mexico-US border, and you think about the story of Black communities, what keeps those stories separate and apart? And in whose interest is that really? So when we're doing these things together, when we're working on these efforts together, is it breaking some of those barriers and some of those things down? Because when we're doing this type of work, really, like when we think about our when we're doing this type of work and we're not breaking those barriers down, those barriers are only really benefiting the systems and the structures that marginalize those communities in very specific ways. And if we don't start to see how those struggles are connected, how those stories are connected, how that pain is connected, then we sort of we're in some ways inevitably keeping the status quo. In the Holy Quran, there is a verse that I take a lot of inspiration from. It says, "We created you into nations and tribes so that you may recognize one another." So for me and for others who are part of this work, to be wherever we may be at any given time, understand the stories, understand the struggles, understand the pain, make it our own, and then work together to shape our lives for the better. That to me is also a part of how we measure impact.
Fabulous. So Erin, to follow up to that, when you talk to an organization with that kind of broad piece, how do you help support them and in making that impact and measuring that impact and even organizing to deliver for it?
Yeah, it's actually one of, I think, the most significant challenges in the world of social good organizations today, because think about the difference. Like when you're in a business, we know how to explain if the business is doing well. So we've got P&Ls and income statements and, all sorts of stuff where we can say, here's our market share and our growth and our profitability. When you're in the social good space, it's very difficult. And there aren't global standards that say, here's how to measure economic mobility consistently across the world. Here's how to measure advances in women's achievement in education. And the thing that makes it even harder is there's no such thing as a single issue person or a single issue family. And so when people are engaging in the world of social good and they've got needs, chances are they're engaging with multiple nonprofits or multiple governmental agencies, and they've all got an influence over how that person is going to achieve the outcomes that they desire. And so what we are focused on doing is working with inside of our company and with experts outside of our company to establish standards around impact reporting for all these different kinds of social good organizations. Because it starts with them being able to capture all the right data and saying, if we're going to think about advancement in education as an example, let's all talk about third grade literacy rates. Interestingly enough, that's actually proven to be an indicator for success. There are a lot of social good organizations, that's not what they're capturing. The reason might be because funders and grant makers might be really interested in, I'd love to know first grade literacy rate. So they're capturing a metric, but not the right one, or not the one that's scalable. And so we have an opportunity, I think, through our software and through our reach to work with these experts and establish for all these different social good needs the common set of data that these social good organizations should be capturing, and then the tools to do it. Part of the challenge in the world of social good, compared to every other industry, technology is lagging behind by like 20 years. And in fact, social good organizations are not incentivized to utilize technology and data. It's one of the things that really needs to be turned upside down. When you go and you look like on Charity Navigator, as an example, and they're assessing the strength of social good organizations, one of the things they measure is what % of their expenses are spent on administrative costs, because it's believed that every dollar ought to go to programs. So what that means is they're actually disincentivized from investing in technology and data to do their work better and to measure the impact and to be able to provide scalable impact over time. And so I think with my company and our ability to both kind of drive the data standards and utilize our voice to turn upside down this way that we're actually causing them to underinvest, real change can happen. And we can really then start to measure scalably, benchmark across, because what I love about the world of social good, nobody's a competitor. If somebody figures out how to address a housing issue for the underserved, like they're going to want to share that with everybody they possibly can. So the more we can get on standards and the more we can understand this is happening over here and it's doing really well and share it with others, the more I think we can amplify the great work all these social good organizations are doing.
That's wonderful. And I see everybody in the panel's heads nodding, saying, yes, that's what we need. That's what we need to do. I know one of the things that that in in that difference between that North Star and what we're trying to achieve, and then the reality of running the business day to day, running a nonprofit day to day, there comes in always this short-term, long-term balance. And I was hoping that, Jill, I can start with you to kind of talk about that balance between the aspiration you have for Public Rights Project and what it takes every day to get up and manage, your fellows and your donors and your board and all of that, and how you're balancing that in order to advance. And I know this is not something that anyone on this call has solved for, so more sharing the struggle.
Yes, absolutely. When someone figures out the solution to this question, please let me know and I will implement it immediately. This is something that I feel like that is a daily struggle for me and for virtually anyone in the social impact space. If you think about, for Public Rights Project, our mission is to close the gap between the promise of our laws and the lived reality of marginalized communities. That is not a 1 year or a 1 month or a 2 year goal. That is something that is going to require transforming the way that governments across the country enforce our laws. And so the keeping focused on that North Star and really being dedicated and passionate about getting to that place, while also understanding that the day-to-day can feel very different. There can be lots of fires to put out. There can be lots of operational challenges. You can't reach the goal that you have if you don't have a working computer and a policy on cell phones and all of the kind of day-to-day operations. I think the biggest thing that I have found that works for me is really getting as clear as I can about, if this is my goal, what are the steps that I can take today, this week, and this month, and start to break it down into more digestible pieces so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming, and then celebrate each of those benchmarks. I'm somebody who really believes in celebrating small victories, and that a small victory can mean anything from successfully getting somebody their laptop who needed it, to winning a really big case for workers across the country to get them the back pay that they're owed in the domestic worker industry. So it can span any from the daily to the really big picture. And so we actually do every other week, we have a weekly wins meeting just on Fridays to celebrate those big and small wins, so that we can get a little bit more focused on the bite size to give us the energy and the courage to keep working for the big goal. And so that's the biggest thing that I've found that really works, is centering on the big picture, breaking it down, and then celebrating each step of the way.
Donna, do you want to build on that from what you've experienced at Iman? Yeah. So for Iman specifically, there was always, so Iman is very inspired by the Saul Alinsky model of organizing. And there was always this tension between direct services and organizing, because we also have a federally qualified health center and we also provide direct services. Often organizing entities don't do that, and often direct services entities don't organize. And there's that tension between, we're trying to meet the immediate need versus we're trying to change the world, or we're trying to, sort of bring us closer, bring the world as it is closer to the world as it could be. But, we've always held the position that these are not mutually exclusive. You cannot really have one without another. We can't ask residents to participate in a campaign, for instance, if they're struggling with diabetes and they're not even able to wake up in the morning and get about their day, for instance. if we don't organize and if we don't keep that big picture in mind, then we will need these services in perpetuity. The cause that we will never have gotten at the root causes of what's causing the problems that we are trying to provide services for, right? But if we also don't or if we don't organize or if we don't provide those direct services, then we won't be able to mobilize the community, because the fact is, we're all trying to survive and everybody has a need. And if that need is not met, we can't really ask them to participate in this big grand vision when they're really just trying to get a food on their table. So from my perspective, it's really about building the infrastructure to tackle both these things. Now, even though Iman was always the direct services and organizing entity, in my case, I really had to advocate for the creation of the department that I now lead, which is the Strategic Initiatives Department. I'm not sure how I think that I'm not sure it's the right name, but it's a department that is focused and devoted to innovation, to big impact opportunities, to mission advancement, and to vision casting, really. So, and now I'm sort of trying to advocate to invest in this department and really significantly expand it, because one or two people cannot drive multi-million-dollar visions. So even as we serve our institutions, we also have to push them, and we have to even agitate. Even wherever we are, we have to constantly be agitators as change makers. So I guess for me, this is about infrastructure building at all levels, because we cannot, like Jill was saying, like there are fires to put out, there are immediate needs to be met, and those have to be met. But at the same time, can we create space for that, for the dreaming? Can we create space? I think of my job as making dreams come true. That's what I do within my organization and within the community. And I think I couldn't do this if there weren't a lot of other people who were doing a lot of those other things that needed to be done as well. So, and then also within the team and at the ground level, just sort of keeping that North Star very visible at all times. The strategic plan, the big vision shouldn't just be something that the leader or an executive office of an organization holds, in secrecy or something. It should be something that everyone involved has a good grasp of, and that everyone can speak to, and everyone can see how they are sort of fitting into that, and that they are a contributor to that, even as they may be chipping away at some important detail.
That's fabulous. And hearing these stories, Maria, maybe I can ask you, you're looking at these organizations and thinking about how to be a critical part of that ecosystem, which is investing and funding in that space. So maybe you could talk a bit about what makes for that compelling story. How do you evaluate these organizations? How do you look at some of what we've just heard and put that into perspective as you're making decisions?
I'd love to. Before I answer that question, I want to just confess something. Like, my heart right now is kind of beating at an elevated rate. In the beginning, it was beating at an elevated rate because it's kind of nervous. You're doing a panel, you want to do right by it, da da da. But now it's beating at an elevated rate because I'm like, preach, Sana. Like, bring it, Aaron. Like, bring it, Jill. And there's just something to be said for the fact that in a room filled with women, there's superheroes abound. And you all have gifts that I don't have, and maybe I have gifts that you don't have, but like, OMG, if they stack on top of each other, we might actually change the world. So my heart's beating. So I just wanted to kind of confess that. Okay. So on the topic that you're raising, let me just zoom out and say, I think we can all recognize the fact that being a small business entrepreneur is a beast, period. We see that every day in our retail corridors with people we know in our lives. Being a small business entrepreneur is a beast. Being a social entrepreneur is bananas. Erin alluded to this a little bit in some of her commentary about effectively like double bottom line, challenges that we have to face, not just a healthy P&L, but a healthy impact. To get to that is crazy difficult. And so we as Red F, we have to recognize the hustle that is intrinsic to creating that outcome. A real case in point is the social enterprise I used to work at in Chicago. One of them was called Clean Slate. It's an exterior maintenance business, kind of making communities more vibrant, cleaner, et cetera, et cetera. That social enterprise had 400% turnover in 1 year. 400%. And the leadership team was like, yes. Now that seems counterintuitive, but the leadership team was stoked by that outcome because that level of turnover meant that people were turning over from that transitional job into more permanent employment in private industry. And when they were in more permanent employment in private industry, their pathway to economic mobility was accelerated. And when their pathway to economic mobility was accelerated, to Sana's point, their mind was no longer on immediate needs, but on possibility. So somehow we have to do the diagnosis that's like, maybe not all of our entrepreneurs on paper are going to have the attributes that it's like a safe bet. It's a good win. Let's go ahead and put our chips on that. So we constantly are thinking about what are the proxies of character, of behavior, of relationships, status, of community connection that are good indicators for a leader's ability to create transformative change. We've done a bunch of work in that area, and I look forward to seeing how we can unpack that even further. And as one final example, I'm wearing these earrings. So these you can't really see, but basically these are earrings made by a social enterprise called Rebel Nell out of Detroit, Michigan. Rebel Nell takes fallen graffiti from the kind of cement corridors and what have you of Detroit, and then peel away the layers of that fallen graffiti and make jewelry out of that fallen graffiti. And then that jewelry, the making of the jewelry, the design of the jewelry, the manufacturing of the jewelry, the selling of the jewelry is all done by women coming out of the homeless shelter system in Detroit. So I say that to say Rebel Nell is onto something. They look at the layers underneath something that is thrown away and figuring out deep within individuals there's a and like so what Rebel Nell is turning on for me, I wear these earrings because it's an homage to the fact that like deep inside of so many people their talent has been overlooked. We need to unlock that, we need to showcase that anew. And so Beth, when we think about how do we assess who's got it, who doesn't, we're not looking necessarily at the numbers on the paper but at the character underneath.
That's so inspiring, and I don't know if you guys are seeing all the hearts and the claps that are going as you all are talking, but the love out there is fabulous. Erin, you see this across all of your clients as they attempt to tell their stories, share their impact, and scale what they're doing across there. I'm wondering if you could share some of the things that you've seen that work really well and how you work with them to help amplify their vision.
Yeah, I think that everything starts with purpose, and everything starts with kind of the long-term view for the impact that you're trying to make. And a long time ago, I don't know if Aristotle really said this, but attributed to Aristotle is this quote, which says, "Where your talents and the needs of the world collide, that's your purpose. Therein lies your purpose." And what I've seen is, as a company or as a social good organization, the clearer you can be on what change you're trying to make in the world, and the more you can understand what it's going to look like when you do that, I think the better you can be at figuring out short and long-term ways to go get there. And I'll actually use my company as an example. So our purpose that we're completely focused on is to power those that power social impact. And we think about our business and the goals of our business in maximizing all the impact we can create in the world. And what that means is we build a multi-year strategy that says, what's that going to look like? How are we going to dream about that? What kind of innovation is required in order for us to do that? It informs everything we do. It informs what we build. It informs who we partner with. It informs how we talk, how we go to market, which clients we serve. So I think the clearer that any organization can be on their North Star, which is the word that everybody used here, the better we can all be about dreaming what that's going to look like. And when you've got that ability to look 5 years, 10 years out and say, this is what I want to make happen, then it's kind of the same thing. Like, how do you start chunking up and understanding what's the right way to measure if I'm moving in the right direction? I think for a lot of these social good organizations that are trying to solve intractable problems, it takes decades to do that. It could take generations to do that. And so it's really important, getting back to celebrating the little wins that Jill talked about, it's really important to figure out what might that look like this quarter or this year, because I won't eradicate poverty this year, but I'm going to move in the direction of eradicating poverty in the next 20 years. And so establishing those milestones that ladder to your long-term purpose are critically important, and keeping an eye on those, just like you're keeping an eye on all the short-term stuff, like, do I have enough cash in the bank to operate my programs? And I think if you do both of those things well, you make sure you're operating in the day-to-day, but you're also moving forward to achieve your purpose, and you're going to do it because you're focused on the right things.
Oh, that's fabulous. I know we're getting, I'm seeing some questions are getting sent into Victoria on her chat, and one of them, from a few different places, so bringing it together, is we got a lot of people listening who are inspired and they're saying, okay, how can I get involved? And maybe tomorrow they're not going to quit their job, but they want to start tomorrow getting involved in making an impact. So would love for you to share thoughts about how can folks, if they're feeling like, hey, this, I forgot this part of myself and this is inspiring them to come back, how could they, what are ways for people to get involved and engaged?
Well, I would advocate for people to quit their jobs and call me, because we're hiring hundreds of people this year. So we can link directly to the open role page. But, you know, impact can happen everywhere in your backyard. Like, I would actually advise for people to find even a social good organization that you care about in a community that you live in. Because oftentimes what those organizations need are people that have got business skills, capabilities, communication skills to help amplify their work. You would be surprised how much impact you can create and how much help you can do. So whether that's being a volunteer, whether that's in many cases joining the board of a nonprofit, because they are always looking for great leaders to help them. Those are ways that you can start and really make a dent in the ability for them to drive their outcomes. But I'm not kidding, call me.
So I'm just going to jump on that and say we are actually hiring for several positions as well. If you're interested, we're hiring an operations associate, a paralegal, a training and fellowships director. So if that's exciting to you, let us know. But I think in the shorter term, I think there are a few things that people often overlook. So one is, are you voting? Are you registered to vote? That's so critically important in every society across the world. And in the United States, we have midterms coming up. There are local elections happening all the time. Do you know who your local elected officials are? We spend so much time thinking about the federal government when so much of what impacts our day-to-day lives are our cities, our counties, our states. So do you know who your mayor is, your city attorney, your district attorney, your city council? Is there a way to get involved in a campaign of somebody that you believe in? Is there an opportunity to go work for an elected official? People need good staff in government. I saw this firsthand. It's part of the reason I started a public rights project, to actually build a talent pathway into state and local government. So those options are highly rewarding. You have a huge opportunity to make a difference. You can also just educate yourself on some of the issues happening that might be under the radar, might not be covered in your local news. We have a newsletter called Represented that you can sign up for on our website at publicrightsproject.org. We also have an online magazine on Medium called The Public that covers a lot of issues that kind of fly under the radar about workers' rights, racial justice, and what equitably enforcing our laws might look like in the country. So those are just a few ideas for how to get started.
I can build on that and just say, I'm hiring too. I'm hiring a senior EA. I'm calling that position my work, ride or die. So if you know somebody who's a great rising project manager and lives in Los Angeles, give them my hookup. But more broadly, I guess I have two asks of you. I want to ask you to live in alignment, and I'll explain what that means. And then I want to ask you to change the conversation. And what I mean by live in alignment is, I think to Erin's point earlier, just zoom out and think about all the ways in which you live today. Where do you shop? You know, where do you buy stuff? With whom do you connect? What restaurants do you go to? And kind of interrogate the mini supply chain of that choice. And then see what jobs are created by whom, for whom, and when. And how can that shift maybe how you choose to consume? What can your conscious consumption be? Live in alignment with your own intrinsic values. You don't need to quit your job to do that. You could do that right here in your heart and in your behavior. And when I say change the conversation, I mean, you know, okay, I'll just confess, like if I go to a cocktail hour or something like that, people ask you what you do. I tell them what I do, and then they do the, oh, you know, they do, oh, you're doing God's work, you know, and I want to take the red wine that's in my hand and throw it in their face. Because I'm like, am I doing good work? Yes, but I'm also, it's hard and the hustle is real and this is tough stuff. And so when I say change the conversation, I want you to use all the conversations you have where you know, talk about your employer. You know, how are we kind of reducing the barriers to entry, particularly for our lowest entry jobs, to make our workplace more inclusive? Interrogate the very behaviors that you do as an employer. You hold a ton of power as an employee to use your voice for good, not just for yourself. I would ask you to look behind you and see who is left out of this conversation, which jobs should be made more accessible to other people but are not for silly reasons. And to Sanda's point, agitate the system to create different change. You know, use your power, change the conversation. That's what my ask would be of you.
So that's a lot, all that that's a lot there. But what I will add to that then is just like sort of knowing your self-interest. You know, you have to have some skin in the game. You have to tap into your story, your values, know your why, because selfless service won't necessarily survive the blows that this work will also bring you. So you've got to know why you're in it and how the work that you're doing or the work that you want to do is also in your best interest, because it is. And like I said earlier, you know, the powers that be do keep things apart. They sort of make us believe that we don't have so much to care about, you know, if there is violence in the city, for instance. It does not affect me. But no, it does affect me. In fact, it does affect the entire regional economy if people aren't being able to take the Green Line from Inglewood because it was closed down 20 years ago, you know, and access the jobs that many, the rest of us are able to access. So know your self-interest. That's number one. Two, and I think everyone, you know, I have had the pleasure of working with a lot of folks from Kearney and young people from Kearney, and I know you're smart, you're talented, and you probably don't need to hear this, but to make a real change and bring about major impact, we're going to have to break out of our lanes, and we're going to have to break out of the silos and work across issue areas, work across organizations, work across sectors. So what I'm really saying by that is the nonprofit sector is not the only sector through which you can make real big change and bring about major impact. Just under the umbrella of Go Green on Racine, we have brought together 4 community organizations, worked with over 12 government agencies across 7 issue areas, established pro bono relationships with 5 corporations, one of which is Kearney, engaged numerous construction and development related businesses, and raised funds from over 20 foundations in the philanthropic sector. Obviously, we would not have been able to do that if we did not have advocates and allies in all of these places. So what I'm asking you to do is to be creative about your location. Where is it that you can find the greatest? Which industry, which place, which sector can you find the greatest leverage for yourself? And then, like Maria was saying, you know, live in alignment with your values wherever you are. Lastly, I would make a bit of a pitch here, but we are Iman are in our 25th year anniversary. So we've been doing this work for 25 years, and we are really building up a drive to, you know, enlist sustainers. So any level and any cadence that you want to, if you want to participate in this work, you can sign up to be a sustainer of this work at any level. If it's $5 a month, $10 a year, whatever it might be, or you know, please sign up to do that. And there's a question that says, who invited you to participate, and put my name in there. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, that's it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to invite Victoria, who's been monitoring the questions in from the audience, to bring in a couple more questions from our audience here, and before we close out in about 10 minutes. So Victoria.
First, I just want to say thank you all so much. I'm so inspired. I'm so energized. I cannot wait to go out and do some vision boarding for myself on who I want to be when I grow up. It's a mix of all of you. But what I heard from the chat, and I think we're kind of walking around it here in our conversation, is there's a lot of challenges, I think, on the horizon, the impact space, ones you're confronting already, but probably some that are coming down the line. What are you watching? What trends are you watching? And, you know, also we're in corporations, corporate giving. Are there trends in corporate giving? And that might help us to think about how we give and spend our time and money as well as corporations.
I can start on that one. Yeah. So we pay a lot of attention to funding patterns, and funding patterns could mean what is the government funding and what's getting passed, what are corporations tending to fund, what do we see individually being funded at the local level or at the individual level. And you know, the last 2 years, what's been very interesting is all the data that we ever had became inconsequential because the entire world changed in 2020. And so, you know, in 2020, in the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, you saw lots and lots of investment in things like Feeding America and food pantries and local community support. And then 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, George Floyd is murdered. And then there's all sorts of money pouring into social justice initiatives. And over the course of the last couple of years, what's been interesting is there have been so many more individual donors that are participating. And it was like an absolute floodgate, because we increased the amount of individual donors over the last 2 years by over 25%. And that's people like you, me, and everybody else on this call that decides, I'm giving $25 here, or I'm rounding up the grocery store, I'm doing whatever it is that I can. Because of that, it's really interesting. Our data right now does show us that those same funders that came into the market in the last couple of years, they're still giving. And so I think people recognize I can make an impact. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is corporations and how they're choosing to give is becoming very strategic. And so they're thinking about, how do I enable entire communities? I think corporations used to say, I want to give to Greenpeace, or I want to give to Feeding America. I think now they're saying, I want to help actually reinvigorate Detroit. I want to help grow South Dallas. And they're thinking about what are all the different constituents that are part of that. And they're not just giving dollars, but they're also saying, how do I enable training and support? Because I think what we all recognize is dollars aren't enough. You need coaches and tools and everything else to make it work. And so we're noticing a lot of more strategic giving that's community-based, that's very collaborative, that I think is going to be the answer to the future. Because again, getting back to this, like, there's no such thing as a single issue family or community. And if you're going to go and heal a community and help it move forward, you've got to think about all the different pieces of it.
But
In terms of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
In terms of what I'm keeping an eye on the kind of issue area, like April coming up is Fair Chance Month. This is very intentionally named. You know, a lot of times we talk about employment in the lens of second chances, but in many cases, as we know, when we zoom out and really think about what are the reasons why people are unemployed in the first place, many often didn't have a first chance. So to call it second chance is kind of, you know, so Fair Chance Month is on the horizon in April, and I think about this as a real opportunity to, again, keep pushing the conversations around, if our philosophies towards inclusion have evolved, great. What are we doing practically with our operations to live that inclusion into existence? That's what I'm keeping an eye on right now.
Excellent, excellent. I know we had one more question in the from the group around diversity. Victoria, you want to share that? And
I think actually, Maria, what you were just saying really dovetails nicely into this question that we got from the audience about thinking about diversity and how, especially in the social space, as you said, it takes a lot of grit, a lot of support to be a social entrepreneur, and funding is even maybe sometimes can be harder to come by, or you really have to think about how you talk about your impact. So how do we help to encourage a more inclusive and diverse community of social entrepreneurs, and what can we do as we're thinking about how to support?
How do we build a more diverse community of social entrepreneurs? Get in where you can fit in, y'all. I mean, like, that's what Sana was saying in her remarks, is the shape of social entrepreneurship is getting quite blurry. You know, it spans from Tom's Shoes to Rebel Nell. You know what I mean? But it can also be, what are you doing to kind of contribute to that conversation writ large? Right now, as central to our strategy at REDF, we are seeking to prioritize leaders of color and leaders with lived experience, particularly the latter population, because who better, again, to Sana's point earlier, who better to devise and design solutions that will be more sustainable than those who've walked in the same shoes, who recognize and realize what an opportunity like this can become and create. So we're not just in this game for kind of the transactional win of getting somebody into a job. We're in this game for the transformational victory of getting people into, I don't know, an economic pathway to joy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's about joy. Jobs just happens to be one of the steps along the way to get there.
If I could add something there, I think I completely agree. And I think one other component of supporting diversity in the social sector is really thinking critically about how corporate foundations, other philanthropy, individuals fund organizations to do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion internally. And that can mean not just the specific programming on DEI, it means thinking really critically about how an organization is set up that either equips or excludes people from different backgrounds. And one specific example from my sector, we place a lot of fellows in state and local government for 2 years. We're trying to change the talent pathway into public service. And what we've seen often in the talent sector is that the stipends and salaries available for fellows almost systematically exclude anyone who doesn't come from family wealth, anyone who has extensive student debt, anyone who has family members that they take care of. And so if we aren't actually going to pay people a living wage to do fellowships, internships, other opportunities that might give them a pathway into the social sector, then we're not actually setting ourselves up for a diverse and thriving social sector. So you can help by any place you're giving to individually, give unrestricted dollars. If you are part of a committee who is spending corporate dollars or other investment, give unrestricted dollars and really be, as Erin said, really be mindful of this, what I think is a really counterproductive focus on programming versus operations and overhead that really prevents the social sector from investing in a diverse and equitable workforce.
Yeah, I would just like to, piggyback on that because, and what Maria was saying also, the thing is that for instance, when Detroit declared bankruptcy, there was even with a lot of funders and people coming in would say, okay, we what if we send truckloads of money to Detroit? Can we save Detroit from bankruptcy? And the fact was no, you can't, because we had not invested in the institutions, we had not invested in the people, we had not created that capital absorption capacity so that when you did have capital, that you actually had a way to deploy it effectively. The thing with many communities, marginalized communities, is that we're always operating on little to no money and no promise of money. And therefore, we're always kind of in this space where we don't even plan for what we might do if and when we did have the money. So in sort of as a mix to your first question and the second one, my eyes are set on like, how do we build that capital absorption capacity, and what is the enabling environment that we need to create? How do funders do this a little differently? Because like, if we're investing in innovation, you can't have the same type of reporting structure that you have when you're investing in programs or services. If you're investing in overheads and operating funds, there is a way that one from the philanthropic sector, and is how you invest and what you expect from your investment. And on the other hand, how do we as leaders in the community and as organizations and institutions, how do we build our capital absorption capacity? How do we create an enabling environment? How do we build the pipelines so that we ready ourselves for a lot of money that should come, that belongs in these communities, that has been stolen from these communities, and that has been there has been criminal disinvestment. And now that we have, even right now with the whole federal recovery grant and all of those dollars pouring in, we're not suddenly having to get ready to ask for big dollars that we just never thought were on the horizon. So building that capacity, I think, is key.
Fabulous. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming up on the hour here. And I wanted to thank each of you for spending time here. The stories have been inspirational. Dawn over in the chat said she took all the jewels and put them on her whiteboard. Dawn, take a photo of that and send it around to us and and share. But I want to thank each of you. It's been a pleasure working with several of you and getting to know you for this panel. But I mostly thank you for inspiring folks. I think one of the things we all heard today was you don't just talk about it. We need to get in it. We need to do the work and get active. So for our audience, whether you're taking the leap to make this your profession or you're going to just take the leap to take action today, we hope that this panel inspired you to take that next step and really help move things forward. And thank you to each of you for joining us today and inspiring our folks on the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank
Thank you so much.